In this country, we buy more newspapers per head than anywhere else in the world, more than 30 million a day. Our newspaper circulations are by far the biggest. On the face of it, we're thoroughly newspaper conscious. But do we really think about the newspapers that we read? Do we really care who owns them? Do we care whether they collapse or are merged with others? Panorama's report on the state of the press tonight begins with Ludovic Kennedy asking these very questions.
What paper do you read?
The Daily Mirror.
Do you know who owns it?
No, not offhand.
Well, now, would you mind if this paper folded up?
Not particularly. I'll get another one.
What newspaper do you read?
Daily Sketch.
Do you know who owns the Daily Sketch?
I haven't the faintest idea.
Would you mind if it packed up?
I couldn't care less.
Do you think there's not much to choose between the various papers, then?
Well, no, they all have news in them. News is news, isn't it?
What newspaper do you read?
Daily Herald.
Would you mind if the Daily Herald packed up?
No. I'm a very strong supporter of the Daily Herald.
Well, you would mind if it
Oh,
packed
yes.
up? Yeah. What daily newspaper do you read?
Anyone. I mean, one I'll find laying about in the train seat.
You don't buy one?
No, well, seldom anyway.
Do you think there's anything to choose between them?
Well, I mean, if you could compare, say, the Mirror to the Daily Telegraph, they're two complete different papers.
Well, would you mind if either the Mirror or the Telegraph were to pack up?
Not particularly. Soon find another paper.
What newspaper do you read, ma'am?
Daily Telegraph.
Now, would you mind if the Daily Telegraph were to pack up?
Well, yes.
Do you know who owns it?
Lord Beaver.
No, I don't think he does.
Well, I read the Daily Express, Telegraph, and the Mirror.
What paper or papers do you read?
Daily Express, mainly.
Well, now, if the Daily Express folded up, would you mind?
I think I would, yes. I find it a very interesting newspaper myself.
Would you mind if any of yours packed up?
Yes, I would, because they're individual papers, and I think that every individual paper has its own individual style of writing and presenting the news.
Do you know who owns the Daily Express?
Mr. Lord Beaverbrook, isn't it?
Do you know who owns the Telegraph?
No, I'm afraid I don't. But I'm not interested in the owner, merely in reading the paper.
What paper do you read, sir?
The Guardian.
Do you know who owns it?
No, I don't think I do.
Well, now, would you mind if the Guardian packed up?
Yes, I think I would.
Do you think there's a danger at the present time of newspapers packing up and of too many newspapers getting into the hands of too few people?
Certainly that's going to happen, isn't it, Thompson?
What do you feel can be done about this?
I don't think there's very much you can do, because you either choice of government control or private control, and it's just the same thing, isn't it? I don't think it's good for the government to control newspapers.
Well, now, do you think there's a danger at the present time in British newspapers of too many newspapers getting into the hands of too few people and thereby changing their policy?
Well, I don't think so, no, because I think we have to remember that newspapers are run by businessmen, and they want to sell newspapers, and they'll only sell what their public wants to read. I don't think there's a danger of that.
Well, do you think there's a danger at the present time with these mergers going on of too many newspapers getting into the hands of too few people?
Definitely, because they'd have their opinion, and that would be the opinion that you'd get. You wouldn't get a balanced opinion in any way whatsoever.
Do you think something should be done about this?
Oh, definitely.
Well, now, what do you think could be done?
Well, I think myself that the government should clamp down on all these mergers. And if it's necessary to subsidise a paper that is doing a good job, well, we waste money on other things. It can be easily put to a better use there, to my mind.
With these mergers of the things that are going on at the present time, it looks as though some newspapers may pack up. Do you think that this is a bad thing?
I think it is a bad thing. I think a monopoly in anything is a bad thing. I think that any paper can subtly influence you. They can only really let you know what they want you to let. If you read their paper, it's only what they want you to know.
Do you think that something should be done to stop these kind of mergers happening?
Yes, I do.
Do you know what could be done?
Well, I think the government ought to institute an inquiry. I don't exactly know what they can do, but I think it would be a good thing if, like the Restrictive Practices Commission, they're able to stop companies. I think that they should be able to stop mergers as well.
I have the Times on weekdays and the Observer on Sunday.
And do you think there's a danger at the present time with these proposed mergers of too many newspapers getting in the hands of too few people?
Yes, I do indeed. Yes, I quite agree.
What do you think could be done about this?
Well, it's very difficult to see what could be done. in the circumstances, because one can't prevent these newspaper owners from combining if the conditions are suitable. And really, I'm afraid I can't answer that question other than how I've already done so.
Do you think that the government could take some action?
No, I don't think the government could take any action, because after all, the press has to be independent, and under the government that's in power at the moment, they approve of private enterprise and so on and so forth. So I don't see how they can take any action at all.
Now, who are the men behind the newspapers? What are the groups that make up Fleet Street? To try to sort this out clearly, if we can tonight, we've arranged the groups in 6 on a large board here with some independents at the end. Let's take them one by one. First of all, then, Lord Beaverbrook and his Express newspapers. Beaverbrook, the Canadian, wizened and tough and a very independent Tory. He flew to the West Indies the day all this began, by the way. He supports the British Empire and a number of other causes from time to time. He does not support Earl Mountbatten of Burma, the British Council, the United Nations, and a number of other causes from time to time. He dislikes television. He hates commercial television, in which he has no stake. Last year's profits of the Express newspapers, £2 million. Now to Lord Rothermere and his associated newspapers. Also a supporter of the Conservative Party. Now his newspapers, including the Daily Mail, which has incorporated the News Chronicle since last year, are in fierce competition with Express newspapers all down the line, except perhaps for the Daily Sketch, which Rothermere bought in 1952 to set up in competition with the Daily Mirror. The Daily Sketch circulation's about 1 million, which is very small compared with the Mirror, as we shall see later. Lord Rothermere was originally the Associated of Associated Rediffusion, but he sold out just before the profits appeared, and now he owns more than 1/3 of Southern Television. He also has considerable newsprint interest. Profits of associated newspapers, 3.4 million. Now here's the brand new headquarters of the Mirror Group, controlled by Cecil Harmsworth King, nephew of Lord Northcliffe and owner of what the Fleet Street wags are now calling the most expensive fireplace in the world, the only one in the new building. Apart from the fireplace, Mr. King, who's moving into his new palace this week with his trusted lieutenant, Mr. Hugh Cudlip, controls the Daily Mirror, with the biggest daily circulation in the country. The Sunday Pictorial, which is dedicated to brighter Sabbaths, a 9.3% share in Associated Television, the huge A.E. Reid paper group, and, important to note, the 130 or more magazines of the Fleetway Group, which used to be Amalgamated Press. Profits last year of the King Empire, 6.4 million. Newspaper politics generally left. Now, apropos of magazines, and there's quite a good deal going on apropos of magazines at the moment, there are no less than 150 in the Oddams group run by Sir Christopher Chancellor. Quiet and modest old Etonian, and for many years the head of Reuter. Oddams also have the Daily Herald, about which everyone has been worried, the Labour Party whom it supports, the TUC, which owns nearly half of it, and of course Oddams themselves, who said that they're willing to spend £7 million in putting it on its feet. The Daily Herald loses money, about as much as is made by its stable partner, the People. Oddams' profits last year, £4.5 million, newspaper politics left. Now, it's into this huge and predominantly magazine empire, at which, perhaps I should say, Mr. King and the Mirror have been casting their eyes, and which Mr. King has, in fact, offered to buy outright. Now, the situation's complicated by the fact that Christopher Chancellor had already arranged to join hands with the next group, Thompson Allied Newspapers. To join hands, in fact, with a comparatively new figure in this world of giants, Roy Thompson. Now, Thompson is a Canadian. He already owns more newspapers than he can name, some 88. They're scattered over Britain and Canada and the rest of the world. He arrived in this country in 1953, bought the Scotsman in 1954, and hasn't stopped since. He owns Scottish television, and described this once, perhaps rashly, as a license to print money. Just over a year ago, he bought the Kemsley Group, including the prosperous Sunday Times and a string of provincial newspapers. Thompson profits last year, £4 million. Politics of the Sunday Times, right. Politics of Roy Thompson, he says, have nothing to do with the case. Now, unless he pulls something out of the bag, It would appear as though Roy Thompson would have to withdraw from the proposed merger with Oddams to avoid being swallowed up by King and the Mirror. Meanwhile, the Sunday Times has a new competitor in the youngest baby in Fleet Street, the Sunday Telegraph of Lord Camrose. Now, his lordship said that he was aiming at the gap between the highbrow and the popular Sundays. The Guardian said today, after reading yesterday's first edition of the Sunday Telegraph, that the new paper filled most obviously the gap between Saturday's and Monday's Daily Telegraph. The profits of the Camrose Company, £500,000, politics conservative, position in this world of merging giants, somewhat exposed. To fill in the picture, we come now to the independents. The Times, the Guardian and the Observer, both controlled by trusts. That mammoth and keenly read fixture of a Sunday afternoon, the News of the World, the chairman of which, Sir William Carrs, reported only today as saying that he's considering buying the Daily Herald and the People if the King's bid to buy Oddams goes through, and that ailing child of the co-op movement, Reynolds News, which must be somewhat discomforted by a Sunday circulation of well under 500,000. Well, that's the situation. I hope you now understand it. Now, what are we to think of the latest moves? Well, in our studio tonight, we have Mr. Roy Thompson. We also have Lord Boothby. As well as Lord Boothby, we have Mr. Joe Grimond, the leader of the Liberal Party and a supporter of the case for a government inquiry, and in the chair we have Ludovic Kennedy.
Mr. Thompson, many people do seem to be worried, as you saw in that film, by the fact that a great many newspapers seem to be getting into the hands of increasingly few people. As somebody who is at the center of this whirlpool of activity, what would you say to alleviate their fears?
I don't think they have any fears if the center of that activity, if the person who accumulates more newspapers is me. My policy is such that I delegate editorial responsibility to the editors of my newspapers. There is no common editorial policy in any Thompson newspaper. Now, surely that is at the base of the whole question. If it is truly the case that the editorial responsibility is delegated to the local editor and manager, or if it's a case of a paper published from London, to the editor and manager there, then surely there can be no danger. It's true that if a man of very firm opinions who desired to impose those opinions on the people were to get control of many newspapers, I think it's bad. Before I had any stake in the big newspaper business in this country, I repeatedly told several of my friends who are big proprietors of newspapers that I thought their policy was wrong. I told Lord Kemsley that.
Mr. Grimond, would you have the same faith in Mr. Thompson's abilities as regards editorial control as he has himself?
No, without any personal reflections on Mr. Thompson, I wouldn't, candidly, for two reasons. First of all, you see, supposing one of your editors, all your editors, feel that some new idea, some rather unpopular, some minority idea shouldn't be given publicity. Do you mean to say that you think this should be entirely excluded? You see, you are just passing off responsibility to your editors. Again, supposing one of them became a fascist or a communist, would you really allow him to go on producing a fascist or communist paper?
Well,
and just one other point. Do you really feel it satisfactory that the main means of purveying news and comments on that news should get more and more into fewer and fewer hands?
Now, just before you answer, Mr. Thompson, could we hear what your views are on it, Bob Boothby?
Well, I don't think there's any need for a government inquiry into the press, because I think that competition between the national newspapers, both daily and Sunday, is very, very fierce at the present time. But I am a little worried about Scotland, and I'd like to just ask Mr. Thompson this one question. I quite agree that he gives extraordinary editorial freedom, remarkable for any newspaper proprietor. I would go further and say he's made the Scotsman a great newspaper. But he may not be there forever. He can't be there forever. And does he in principle think it right that one man who might wish to impose his will should control in Scotland the Scotsman, the Aberdeen Press and Journal, and independent television?
Mr. Thompson?
Yes, I don't see anything wrong with it at all. My successor will be my son. He's had a very good schooling in my theory of newspaper publishing. He has seen it succeed. I couldn't have been where I am today if it hadn't succeeded. He will carry on those principles. And under those conditions, I can't see that there's, within any reasonable period of time, any cause for anxiety.
But may I just put this, Joe? It does mean that if a particular point of view doesn't sell, it doesn't get put before the public. Is that right?
No, it isn't right. You see, my editors are completely given freedom in connection with the editorial matters. I don't even sometimes read their opinions. And I believe that an editor locally, the editor and the manager locally, are at least equal to any proprietor locally. Often I'd give them full marks as being much ahead of the proprietor.
Well, now, what about Mr. Grimond's objection to the possibility of an editor coming into control and then political opinions of that editor becoming very strange, very wild?
Well, I would say this. For instance, if one of my editors became an atheist and practiced and preached those things in the paper, if he attacked the royal family, if he did some of those completely unreasonable and impossible things, I would think I had a bad editor.
If you became a communist,
I'd probably sack him.
If you became a communist, may I just ask that? If you became a communist?
Well, I would think his judgment, I would watch his decisions from then on with grave doubt.
Begin to read
and you'd sack him again.
No, not necessarily. I think I'd probably try to convert him. But obviously, I have some responsibility for editorial policy. If I was to buy newspapers and appoint editors who preached something or promulgated ideas that were completely at variance with public interest, then one obviously must do something about it. But let me tell you this. This is purely an academic discussion. In all my experience, and it's been considerable, such a problem has never arisen. I don't think it ever would.
Yeah, but you've got, Mr. Thompson, at the moment, a control in Scotland that's quite without parallel. Now, I'm frankly worried far more about, from the potential point of view, from the danger that looms ahead, 5-10 years ahead, about this combination of television and the press than I am of the press alone, because there's fierce competition in the press. But you see, you have used the license given you in the dark, behind the backs of the public, by the Independent Television Authority for Scottish television, to help you to buy the Kemsley press. Now, I don't feel that that's good from the point of view of the future of the country.
Bob, do you figure I should have used those profits to buy into a steel mill or a steamship company or a railway? I mean, what is the difference? I buy into the businesses I know best. I know the newspaper business, and I know television. And surely it's a matter that if I make money in television, which fortunately I'm doing, then why shouldn't I use that money to buy into some other business?
I quite see that, Mr. But from the public's point of view, it surely is desirable that television should be in competition with the press, and that it should be in a position to review movements in the press such as have been going on, to tell the public impartially what all these takeover bids mean. Surely you're not in favor of the whole of television and the press getting together.
Have you ever observed television protecting the press?
Yes, I think that this sort of program on television, we're on television now, does enlighten the public about what is happening in the press.
And I think this appears on independent television,
well,
too.
Exactly, but that's a good thing, and I think this should be preserved.
Well, then why do you say that...
I don't think it does, Mr. Thompson. I don't think you find this program appearing on television. Look, I don't think they'll
you're not on the ITA as much as BBC, but I know the ITA programs.
Now, can I ask you another thing about the press? We hear very disturbing stories about the restrictive practices accepted by the employers, enforced by the union.
Yes.
About the failure to bring in or use new methods because it doesn't suit the industry. And we are told that this is one of the factors which leads to monopoly, because the big chaps like it and the small chaps get squeezed out, sort of News Chronicle, Daily Herald level. Now, is this true?
Is there a shortage of compositors, for example, at the moment?
Could you just answer the main thing of Mr. Grimond's to start off?
Let me say this. If you call me one of the big fellas, I don't like it. I would much prefer it didn't happen. So you can, on that basis, you can say that what you say is not correct. Actually, there are restrictive practices. I think the unions could not reasonably deny that that's the case. I agree that there should be an inquiry into this. That's why I would favor a public inquiry, because I think in the interest of the unions, the members of the unions themselves, it would be better to bring these things in the open. Now, let me say very quickly that the unions have been extraordinarily reasonable in their dealings with me. I have no real basis for complaint, because I deal with them myself. And I think very often the reason that these things happen is because most proprietors will not deal with the unions. they're afraid of the unions, and they delegate it to number 2, 3, or 4 men in their organization. I must say that I've been treated very fairly by the unions in transferring the Sunday Times to Thompson House, and it's been transferred well. So, but still, I believe it should be investigated in the interests of the union members themselves. I would like to see it investigated. I would like to see all the facts brought out, and I believe that between us we could prove that these practices are not in the interest of the unions themselves, and that they would stimulate competition and probably result in more newspapers being started.
That's right. May I just on that point ask this one question, Mr. Thompson? Would you say that the high costs of newspaper production in this country, due to restrictive practices and perhaps failure to use new machinery and so forth, have to some extent been responsible for the fact that moderate-sized newspapers like the News Chronicle, for example, have been unable to make a profit?
I agree entirely. But remember this, always take this in, the conditions of London publishing are very much different to the conditions in the provinces. Look, both of the newspapers that I was obliged to close, if I could have transferred them to a provincial centre, printed them there, and got the same distribution as I got from London, they would never need to have closed.
Do you think it's essential that newspapers should be almost entirely financed by advertising? Or do you think the public could afford to pay more for its newspapers and therefore release you a bit from advertising pressure?
Joe, I have always advocated that the public should pay more for newspapers and there should be less dependence on advertising. But are you suggesting now that the government should take a finger in the newspaper business? There's no other way that you're going to accomplish it.
No, but I wouldn't rule it out that if this tendency towards monopoly went on, the government should set up a body, after all, like the ITA, to just watch what's happening, inform the public, and possibly, if the worst came to the worst, lend money not so much to the big dailies, but to things like the newspaper's opinion, like
It'd be better if the press did it themselves.
Well, much better.
Mr.
But
Thompson,
what would you say about that?
I'm afraid we haven't got time to answer that question, but may I ask you, just as one last question, do you feel that newspapers mean anything more to you than a means of making money? And could I have a quick answer?
Well, look, I would say this. The newspapers business is a wonderful business. I'm fascinated by it. I love it. But at the same time, I'm in the business to make money. It's a business.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much.